Boom! What's up, everyone? Welcome to Simulation, an awesome show we have for you today. We will be talking about the future of meat. We'll be talking about plant-based meat, cultured meat. We have an epic guest to be talking about this with us today, Dr. Liz Specht. Thank you for joining us on the show.
Thank you for having me. Excited to be here.
Yes, and we have lots of similar circles and families of Good Food Institute people and clean meat people and biotech entrepreneurs, and I'm just so happy to be talking about this on the show more often because this is such a crucial part of a clean, sustainable, long-term food ecosystem.
Absolutely. And it's just really fun to geek out about. There's a lot of really fundamental science and technology that's super cool in this field.
It's I don't want to kill 1 million chickens per hour in the United States. I'm so sick of that. Yeah.
That's so yesterday.
That's so. Yes, it's so yesterday. We are okay. So let's start by talking to you because you have a PhD and you did that at UCSD in biological sciences. Prior to that, at Johns Hopkins. And you did postdoc research at Boulder with whole cell biosensor platforms. You've been a TA. This is all very exciting because to me it's important to understand the person's background. And you obviously fell in love with biotech.
Yep.
How did that happen?
Yeah, so I've always been a little bit of a nerd, I'll be honest.
Good.
Yeah, pretty scientifically inclined, but also curious to use technology and science to make the world a better place. And so, I kind of was drawn into chemical engineering at first, and there was a sub-track within the chemical engineering major at Johns Hopkins on biomolecular engineering. And that was when my mind was blown for the first time about what a cool kind of toolkit biology has given us to build things that never existed before or that natural selection, wouldn't be incentivized to make, but that could be really useful for us and solving some of the challenges that we have played a part in creating in the world, to be honest. And so I was interested in, using the power of biological systems and this beautiful principle of, exponential growth that these systems exhibit. And using that to do good in the world. So I was kind of initially gravitated towards sort of public health applications of biotech.
Yeah.
So my graduate research was in an algae lab, actually, but the projects that drew me into that lab were, could we use algae as a production platform for a therapeutic or for a vaccine that you could make at massive scale at really low cost, to make that accessible to people, say, in developing regions of the world.
Algae is very able to be grown in massive quantities
Yeah.
and used for lots of purposes.
Exactly. It's ubiquitous. It's got really cool kind of biological diversity of different pathways inside various, different domains of the algal world and all of that.
I love how you said that. You're we're not waiting for evolution anymore. We're gonna make ourselves.
We can't afford to wait for evolution. So yeah, that kind of drew me into global health. I had spent a couple of summers abroad when I was in college, doing water sample testing in communities in India. And so,
Cool.
Yeah, so that was kind of my exposure to, populations where, frankly, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit from a technology perspective. You could do relatively straightforward things and have a massive impact for the better on millions of people's lives or billions of people's lives. So that was kind of where I was really geeking out for several years.
Yeah. I love that. I'm just feeling you talk about that, and it warms me to see how much you care.
Yeah.
And you said that you started seeing it as somewhere where you could help with the technology, with biotech, with helping reduce suffering with these low-hanging fruits. And that to me is a mindset that I would love for more people to care about.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely appreciate people who just love science for science's sake. But for me, that could never get me going. I need something applied. I need something concrete in the world to be sort of working towards. So after my graduate work, I went and did a postdoc for a couple of years, and this is where I was building basically a set of tools that could someday serve as a diagnostic in, say a remote resource-limited setting. So can we use biotechnology to create biosensors that could look for, whether it's a disease pathogen or maybe an environmental contaminant or something like that, and have it kind of baked into that organism to give you a readout when it senses something like that.
And what was the one that you engineered to be a biosensor?
So I was working just in simple lab bacteria. Cool. So, simplest system to engineer, very straightforward.
And what was it detecting?
Not the fanciest. So my platform was kind of antigen agnostic. So it was more about, can we build a system that's taking a signal from outside the cell and turn on basically a cascade of activity within the cell that causes the cell to, for example, change color, so to express a pigment.
Nice.
So this was
cool.
really building off of a lot of work that's been going on in the synthetic biology world, to have these kind of, they design them out just like an electrical engineering circuit, basically. Like you've got these, Boolean logic on off, input to output, and you can modulate all of that.
That is genetic engineering and expressions, being God of the expressions, which is just super exciting stuff.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So I was doing my postdoc, loved my project, loved my advisor, loved my lab. Everything was perfect, except for some reason, I started going down this rabbit hole of reading about animal agriculture and the way in which we currently produce meat and dairy and eggs and other animal products, and all of the kind of externalized consequences of that, environmentally, public health risks to us as individuals consuming those, animal welfare considerations.
Yes.
And so all of a sudden I was in a situation where the thing I had become most passionate about was not the thing I was addressing in my day job.
Yes.
And so it actually wasn't obvious to me at first, how do I use a biotech background to address something like animal agriculture? It had always struck me as, this is a consumer education issue, or this is a policy problem, or something like that, right? How do we incentivize people to shift their dietary behavior? It didn't seem like the kind of thing that I could touch with my background. And so it was a bit of a light bulb moment for me, and it only came about when I heard of the Good Food Institute that, yeah, absolutely, you can use a biology background, a chemical engineering background, a biochemistry background, to make better food products that compete on three attributes: taste, price, convenience, which are what drives basically all consumer food buying behavior.
Taste, price, convenience.
Yeah, so how could you make products that satisfy those without compromise, without asking people to deal with a subpar substitution, but do it without involving the animal?
Yep.
How could you do it without animal agriculture and all of those externalized costs?
I envisioned you 2.5 years ago, just like sorting through all of this craziness about animal agriculture and suffering and the unsustainable ecosystems, and you were like, I care so much about this, but I'm not doing it in my day-to-day life. How do I find this? And then Good Food Institute came. Was that how did you get linked up with Good Food Institute?
Yeah, so through a couple of introductions, it was really, really fortuitous timing. Looking back, I don't know how I got this lucky.
Me too.
So GFI was formed almost 3 years ago. We're about 3 years old as an organization, and I've been with them for almost 2.5 years. So the time at which I found the job posting for the senior scientist role and applied to it, it had just been put up, and this was just kind of the point in my life where I was having this, this grappling process, and so it was a perfect fit. I read the job description and I said, wow, someone wrote this for me. This feels like mine. So it's been a wild ride because we've grown really quickly as an organization, and we engage with all these different sectors. That's really mind-blowing compared to just being in one academic research lab after another, where it feels very familiar and comfortable, but
the applicability of what you're doing to the real world drives you.
Yes.
And I'm just so happy that you had that. It almost felt like it was the perfect opportunity manifesting itself for you. And those moments are they're so strange. They make me feel, they're ethereal. They make me feel like there's something going on in the cosmos, in this universe that, how did that line up? How did this line up? All this different type of stuff. So
very cool.
So now let's do some Good Food Institute unpacking. Let's explore. So the mission is to promote this healthy, humane, sustainable food supply across our world. And how does Good Food Institute do that?
Yeah, so it's kind of a funny role for a nonprofit, right? How do we engage with an emerging industry and help support that kind of innovation ecosystem? So we do it in several different ways. We have multiple different departments within our organization that are kind of pushing on different pieces of this puzzle. So we have our science and technology department. That's obviously where I reside. We do a lot of kind of mapping out the landscape of technology needs for developing better plant-based products, as well as for bringing some of these cell-based products, cellular agriculture products to market, which we can talk about in a second.
So is this then like a library of you working with the different companies in plant-based and cell ag and?
So our process for kind of defining what are these key challenges is a mixture of reading through the scientific literature, talking with folks in industry, so people at these startups, people in other industries, so in the established life science industry, or folks in the meat industry who have meat science expertise. We actually talk to a lot of people on that side. Kind of hearing from everyone, what are your bottlenecks? What are your sticking points? What challenges do you face that if someone came up with a solution, it would allow you to go further and faster? And then we put those into a couple different channels to basically get that kind of menu of needs in front of different scientific communities who are in a position to address those needs. So we publish white papers, we have a couple peer-reviewed papers, we write pieces for like trade journals and industry journals, and then we also speak a lot at conferences. So I spend quite a bit of my day-to-day job going and talking to stem cell biologists or cell culture engineers, or again, meat scientists or synthetic biologists. And basically saying, hey, look, here's
under science and tech?
Yes.
That's still under science and tech?
Yeah, we're still in the first department.
The white papers and the speaking and the organization of this information is all under science and tech.
Yeah, wow. And then we also, we interface with, so after kind of mapping out what are some of these high impact projects that we'd like to see addressed, then we go out and actually interface with scientists who can address those. So we work with academic researchers, we work directly with these startups and help kind of refine their technical plan and provide connections or opportunities that we think would eliminate some of their hurdles or at least alleviate them. And then the other thing we work on is getting funding for that work. So we work on both the private and the public side of that. So interfacing with government agencies like NSF and NIH, and really trying to...
And how much do they allocate towards this every year?
Very little right now.
Are we talking like $10 million or less than that?
Maybe less than that. Very little.
Damn.
Yeah. So I think
so unfortunate.
This is something that we've seen
need to allocate more
across the field, is that some of these, particularly on the cellular agriculture side of things.
God, we just put $100 billion more into our military-industrial complex.
Right. Yeah. And yet, addressing these food sustainability issues are really core to
being leaders in this across the world. Yeah, so striking a better balance between those two, between foreign policy as well as domestic food supply.
Food security, absolutely. Like, I think this is, is part and parcel to the mission of so many of our government agencies. So part of our time is spent basically trying to get them to see that, right? And to allocate more resources in this direction. And then we also talk with folks like venture capital firms and angel investors and even corporate venture arms. So folks who are kind of sold on the market potential of this space. They see this fabulous growth of, for example, these plant-based products, but they need sometimes a little help digging into the technical side of things and doing the scientific side of their due diligence for these companies.
Are you aware of the 50 years, Ella Madej and Seth Banna?
Yeah, we're good friends with them.
Good, and then Mariana Senko as well?
Yes.
Yes?
Now
okay.
at Khosla, yes.
Okay, cool. I wanted to make sure you were connected, otherwise we would, because they're very future foodie, and and I think it's important for you people like that to know each other, like you're describing.
The investment community is really excited about this. So there's a lot of advocates for more investors in this space, and frankly, a lot of very collaborative kind of sharing information, sharing deal flow, things like that. Because I think a lot of people, this is not just a way of making money. It's part of their job that they actually feel equally passionate about, which is very cool.
This is about a long-term sustainable future, and I love that part about this. So where did the funding, the Govan Venture funding, does that still science and tech? That's separate?
Yeah, so that's still mostly science and technology, but kind of bleeds into our other departments. So we've got an innovation department, so they also work with investors as well as startup companies. So they really exist to make it easier for a startup company to innovate in this space and to succeed. Cool. So they give them support not so much on the technical side, but on their business plan and their pitch deck and introductions to people who can help them. Then we have
Do you guys work with some of the indie bio companies that are in the clean meat space?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yep.
That's awesome.
We work with quite a few kind of tech incubators and biotech incubators. We actually, in this latest round of Y Combinator, we were one of the few nonprofits that they accepted into their program. So we got to participate in their sort of trainings and programmatic work, and then we actually got to pitch at Demo Day for Y Combinator.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's innovation. We have a corporate engagement team that mostly is working with kind of established food industry.
The Tysons of the world.
Yeah, including meat companies, but also, just kind of big food at large, as well as retailers, so grocery stores, and
like Whole Foods and stuff like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting
and
them
food
more
service.
ready to hold the products that are coming in.
Exactly.
Excited to hold those products.
Yeah, so really working on kind of opening up distribution and making sure that these plant-based products, once they can kind of ramp up production capacity, which is actually one of their bottlenecks right now. Demand is outstripping their ability to produce them fast enough. But making sure that these doors are open to these products to really scale quickly.
Science and tech, and then innovation, and then the corporate outreach side. So there's three main.
No, I'm not done yet.
There's 17 actually.
Our next kind of core programmatic arm is our policy team. So they work on a few main fronts. One is kind of paving the way from a regulatory perspective for some of these products that are brand new to market. So, the cell-based meats and things like that have not already been on the food scene.
They have to get through the FDA.
It's still up in the air, actually, which agency will be in charge of this, because USDA regulates meat, FDA regulates other food products, and so there's actually some really interesting conversations going on between the agencies.
Will you teach us a bit about that quick? Because that's completely new to me and I bet other people.
Yeah, so this is like, as soon as I say something about this, it'll be outdated, because they're like literally on Monday, there is a series of meetings starting that are hosted by FDA and USDA to kind of explore the technology, figure out, how does this fit within existing frameworks? Who has the best expertise to evaluate, and is it different if you're talking about, pre-market kind of safety review versus ongoing inspection of production facilities and things like that. So yeah, it's a really
Whoa.
fascinating conversation that's
Yeah.
going on. So our policy team does a lot of kind of coordinating for the industry, because the industry is still a bunch of really young startup companies, you know. So there's a need for kind of a central voice there for these types of discussions. So that's a big part of what our policy team does. They also work kind of more on the legislative side with some of these issues around how do you label these products. And there's a term called standards of identity, which means, you know, can you call soy milk milk, or is that in violation of a standard of identity? So there's a lot of, again...
Can you call clean meat meat?
Exactly. This is one of those questions.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So
Interesting.
to be seen, but I think
Yeah.
again the central charge for us as an organization trying to help you know, promote and support this industry is that we don't want any kind of restrictions or handicaps that would prevent these plant-based and cell-based alternatives from competing on a level playing field with their kind of conventional animal-based counterparts. And then our policy team also helps.
I was just envisioning walking into the grocery stores and just seeing whole sections of plant-based and cell-based meats to choose from instead of just people are like, why would I pick the slaughtered animal versions and it's even cheaper to pick the plant and the cell-based versions and it's healthier and it's sustainable and oh, I'm so excited for that. We're getting there. Hopefully a decade.
Sooner than we think.
Hopefully a decade. Yeah.
And then policy also works with us a little bit to help kind of get language into appropriations bills and things like that to get more R&D dollars dedicated to these areas. And then finally, and I'll quit after this one, we have an international engagement team that's basically a force multiplier for all of the work that we're doing that's predominantly in the US, but we do have a global purview.
Where's like the second big GFI hub?
So we have managing directors in Israel, Brazil, India, China. Just recently we hired someone in Hong Kong. We're looking to have someone in Europe in fairly short order.
Great idea, yeah.
And so right now, all of those places are just 1 or 2 people, but our India managing director is really building out his team because there's a lot of talent in the country on the kind of biotech side of things.
Oh, I loved seeing those very short videos of how India is doing things like just getting rid of their single-use items. And they're, so good. Okay, so spreading across the world, fantastic. Policy, innovation, tech, science. Okay, so let's unpack the more of the nuance of the alternatives. Yeah.
So when we talk about alternative proteins, I'm thinking about it from a production standpoint, right? From a facility or a technical standpoint. What does it take to actually make these products? So the sort of landscape of alternatives, there's the plant-based products. So that's fairly straightforward, right? You grow a crop in the field, you harvest the edible portion of that, and then usually you're isolating or refining or enriching for the protein fraction of that. And then those go into plant-based meat products like, you know, companies like Beyond Meat or Impossible Foods. Those are all plant-based protein sources they're using.
And what type of plant-based protein is it?
Yeah, good question. So most of the plant-based meat products on the market are using either soy protein or wheat protein. In the last few years, pea protein has become really, really popular.
Cool.
Some, like Impossible Foods, they use potato protein. So a lot of companies are looking to diversify the source of protein that they're using, because right now it's been a pretty narrow window compared to all the possible plant proteins out there.
Mung bean became popular.
Just is using that in their scramble.
That's
absolutely.
exciting.
It's a whole new world. We have just scratched the surface in terms of which proteins we're using.
And quick question, is soy-based protein, there's some skepticism around that, but now there's pea-based and mung bean and all these other potato-based plant protein. But what is the soy dilemma thing that's going on?
Yeah, so I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around soy. I mean, soy does have potentially an allergenicity issue. It is one of like the 9 most common allergens. So that is of concern to consumers. I think some of the other, previously there were concerns around, phytoestrogens in soy and things like that. Largely those concerns really have not been supported by the data. But it's more of it's about giving the consumer what they want. So if consumers say we want a soy-free product or a wheat-free product or whatever, I think companies take that to heart, and that's part of what's driving this desire to kind of explore other sources.
Cool, thank you for that.
Yeah. And then we can look at other basically cell culture based platforms to produce proteins. So kind of all the way on the right here, we've got animal cell culture. So that's cell-based meat, cultured meat, clean meat. There's a very active kind of discussion in the field around what do we call this product. But that's basically growing animal cells, which is obviously what's in meat, muscle cells, fat cells, et cetera. And just growing them directly rather than growing the whole animal.
And that comes from a stem cell sample from the
That's right.
origin source.
Yep. So at some point you have to go to an animal, either to an adult animal or you can go to an embryo even, and get that starting material, and then you're proliferating it basically in culture. So after that first step, you're done with the animal and off you go. But then you can culture other types of cells too. So non-animal cell culture has actually been used in the food industry for a long time, which I think
this is like mycelium, right?
Yeah, so that's one of the things you could grow is fungal cells in culture. So there's a company called Quorn, Quorn, that's been making basically meat alternatives out of fungal protein, or they call it mycoprotein, for a really long time. And they are also innovating in this space and developing new types of products and so forth. But you can also use non-animal cell culture to produce specific proteins that have what's called really high functionality in food applications. So a lot of food processing enzymes that have been used, again, for decades and decades in the food system are made through what's called recombinant protein production, where you have, say a yeast cell is your host organism, but within that yeast cell, you can stick the gene for either an animal protein or maybe a protein that is found in the plant kingdom or somewhere else, but you simply want to make it at really large scale. So this is how we, for decades now, have been making chymosin, which is the kind of coagulating enzyme from rennet for making cheese. We used to get it from scraping calf stomachs, but now we simply produce that enzyme through a recombinant protein platform. So companies today are taking basically
that's
that
also
same...
insulin became huge from recombinant
Absolutely, yeah. So it's very, very prevalent in the pharma industry and therapeutics. So companies today are kind of taking that paradigm and saying, what other highly functional animal proteins might we want to produce in a platform like this, and then combine those with other plant-based ingredients to get closer to that consumer experience of the animal product. So for example, again, going back to Impossible Foods, they make their hemoglobin protein. It's a gene from soy called leg hemoglobin, but that holds the heme, which contributes to the color of their product and also the taste of their product, as well as iron content, so a nutritional claim there as well. And they produce that through a recombinant platform like this.
And that was one of the 3 main ones you said: taste, price, and
convenience, which is basically can you find it, can you access it?
Exactly,
right? And then there's companies like Clara Foods is making proteins that are found in egg white through a platform similar to this.
And it's got to be indistinguishable in taste, or potentially better in taste.
Or potentially better, yeah. So that's what excites me, is once you've kind of divorced your method of production from the animal itself, you're no longer restricted to this weird sort of historical happenstance. Like we didn't go around and canvass the entire animal kingdom to find that like cows have the best tasting milk, right? They just happened to like live near us while we were domesticating animals and they were relatively amenable to domestication, right? But what if the best tasting milk or the most nutritious milk or meat or any other
that we
thing
could make
comes from
synthesize,
from some animal that like lives nowhere near where humans live or is really hard to cultivate.
The best tasting milk comes from Ron. Right, Ron?
That's done.
Okay, let's keep rolling.
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's talk about plant-based meat in a little more detail, because this is one of the areas where there's actually a lot of technological innovation that could happen. I think people like look at a veggie burger and they say, okay, we've had veggie burgers for decades, like how much better could they get, right? When really there's been so little kind of concerted research in the area of trying to make these products better that I think we could get a really long way. So just to kind of set the stage for what we're doing with plant-based meat. So you're taking a plant protein and you're trying to make it taste and behave and structure itself like an animal protein.
Yeah.
And these proteins tend to be fairly different from a kind of biochemical perspective. So
like a potato protein, like a beef protein, that's...
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so
it's a tough challenge.
It is a tough challenge because the issue is this. You've got these plant storage proteins. That's what most of the protein in plants tends to be. It's like, say it's stored in the bean or the seed or whatever. It's there to store those amino acids for that seed to then ultimately germinate and become a plant, right? So there are these storage proteins. They tend to be pretty globular, like they're not really, interacting too much within the cell. They're just storing. Whereas the proteins in, say, meat are these really functional fibrillar kind of, muscle fibers, basically,
yes.
right? So it's a pretty different structure, and that's why the texture of these products is one of the trickiest things to get right. And then, of course, there's the flavor and all of that.
Yeah.
So our way of kind of looking at the technology challenges is to build out a mind map of all the various ways in which you, all of the different basic technological aspects of this that you need to come to fruition to make a really good product. So, starting from the source material itself, should we be using something like soy, or could we find plant protein sources that just inherently perform much better in this type of application that don't taste as beany, or that or that form these types of structures more easily? So there's a whole host of work to be done on kind of optimizing those protein sources.
From what you just described, this is a big, huge challenge, and also there's so much to parse in the food possibility arena to see what can work best.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a lot of mind mapping to do.
Yeah.
Knowledge graphing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's exciting. But it's exciting because for all of these, there are so many technologies, kind of enabling technologies that have been developed in other fields or similar fields that just haven't yet been applied to this particular problem. Take, for example, advances in high throughput breeding for crops. So you can now, look at all of these genomic data points we have and develop really sophisticated breeding algorithms to get a crop that grows really well in, say, saline soil conditions, for example. You can use that exact same paradigm, but have your outcome not be growth in a certain type of soil, but performance as a raw material for plant-based meat, right?
Cool.
So once you've got your raw material, then you can enrich for that protein and then functionalize that protein. So you can use chemical methods, you can use enzymes, so biological methods, you can use mechanical methods to help get this kind of structure and function to make these products feel and taste like meat products. So as a bit more concrete example, a lot of plant-based meat companies use a process called extrusion. So you dump this plant protein into this big, expensive, heavy piece of equipment that mixes it with water and basically uses two steel screws that turn kind of against each other to melt those proteins and then align them into fibers like meat.
Whoa, yeah.
So there you're using basically mechanical force
Extrusion.
to get that kind of structure.
And there's easier ways, we hypothesize, to do this.
I think there are.
Yes.
So yeah, extrusion is a really old technology. It's been used in a lot of different sectors, everything from plastics to the food industry. And so I think there's a lot of room to look for better methods that are less less energy intensive, for example, and just kind of less harsh on the proteins.
How do we get the plant-based proteins to taste and be indistinguishable from the meat?
Yeah, so that's kind of the last sector here is the formulation. So what other kind of flavoring ingredients are you adding?
What
how do you
are
bring
some
all
of
those
those,
together?
the flavoring ingredients?
I mean, it's across the board. So there are a lot of, ingredients that contribute to like an umami or a savory flavor, for example. Again, to come back to Impossible, they're using this heme protein to provide flavor. In some cases, you are trying to mask some of the undesirable flavors from a plant protein. So often plant proteins have this kind of beany or bitter flavor. So are there ingredients you can add that kind of neutralize those and allow some of the other flavorings to really show their true colors?
Thank you, Ron. This is really important for me because I think that this speaks volumes to the way that we are going to be growing growing meat in big bioreactors, plant-based and cell-based, especially. Like this cell proliferation for me is all about like scale. It's like I'm trying to get this huge scale as quickly as possible, effectively as possible, to get it into as many grocery stores and
so let's talk about the cell-based products. So again, clean meat, cell-based, cultured meat, call it whatever you wish.
Yes. But plant proteins wouldn't go through a bioreactor.
No,
Yes.
but you might have some ingredients that are produced through a cell culture platform.
Okay.
But yeah, here we're talking particularly about the cell-based meat. So what you get basically at the end of this process is meat. It is muscle cells, fat cells, etc., from an animal. So the process is basically this. You have to start with a sample of cells from the animal that you're working with. It can come from an adult animal, from something like a biopsy. It can come from an embryo of that animal. So you can start with several different types of cells, and there's kind of downstream considerations in your process depending where you first isolate those cells from. But once you have them, then they go into what's called a seed train. So you start from a small number of cells. You have to kind of stage that up, step by step, and then you can get to sort of large-scale cell proliferation. So again, cells have this beautiful biological property that one cell becomes two become four, et cetera. So it's really, really powerful 32. To do this at large scale. If you've got,
Was it like 10 steps becomes like a billion or something?
Yeah,
really quick. It's fast. Proliferation.
Yeah, so the more you can operate these types of processes, continuously and at really large volume, if you've got a reactor that's producing the equivalent of 10,000 pounds of meat in a day, the next day you'll have another 10,000 pounds. The next day you'll have another 10,000. Again, it's this exponential growth.
Yeah. Wow.
So that is really powerful. And then once you've got this huge number of cells, which, cells that proliferate and divide like that are not cells like mature muscle cells. They're at kind of an earlier stage in their developmental lineage. So at some point, once you've got all your millions and billions and trillions of cells, then you have to go into kind of phase 2 of the process.
The scaffolding.
Yeah, so where you get them to differentiate and mature into those desired final cell types. So in this process,
perfusion is the word.
So yeah, so that's just kind of getting the nutrients through these cells that are seated on this kind of 3D spongy scaffold that's helping to kind of guide them as they differentiate into the final cell types that we want. So this, this process as a whole is still relatively early stage. We're still, startups working at kind of bench scale and optimizing the cells they're working with, optimizing the nutrient media that they're feeding those cells. But there's kind of a lot of options for what this might ultimately look like at production scale, and there's a lot of really fundamental engineering that goes into this.
I'm so excited for that design and engineering to take off, because then there's all of the different ways that people will start exploring this. But then there's the FDA, USDA, like cracking down on like making sure that it's proper.
Yeah, so all of these conversations are and should be happening in parallel, because regulatory considerations or food safety considerations should be part and parcel of the process design, right? And even thinking about what type of attributes do you want for your cell line is determined by what you think this process will ultimately look like at industrial scale. So this field is fascinating, because it's really important for different aspects of this research and development to not get siloed, right? There needs to be a really robust conversation and communication.
Some open sourcing.
Exactly.
That would be great.
Yeah.
An open sourcing to the cell agriculture and biotech and bioreactors. That'd be great.
One of the endeavors that we're currently trying to coordinate is basically a clean meat research center, so that you could have potential industry partners or startup companies or academics come and kind of iterate on a process, have an actual, say, pilot scale facility that's modular, and you can play around with different unit operations, or produce some sample that you can then test for nutritional equivalence, and kind of allow all of these other studies to be done that can really contribute to this industry.
I love it.
Yeah. So just to give a sense of how quickly this industry has grown. So at the end of 2016, less than 2 years ago, we're in October 2018 now, there were arguably only 4 companies in this space. And the picture today is actually even bigger than this. So there's some companies that are so young they don't have a logo, or they're still in stealth mode, so they haven't announced themselves to the world. And what I find really exciting is that these span the entire globe. There's companies on here in the US, obviously, in Canada, in Israel, in Japan, in Singapore, China.
Good.
So we're seeing a lot of innovation. And they're all taking a somewhat different approach based on who the founders are and what their strengths are that they're bringing to the table.
Yeah.
So it's very exciting.
I love it. And this is by 2020, it's just going to be 2022, just going to be exploding.
Yeah. What I think is also really exciting is how many other industries are now getting involved in this. So it's no longer just a bunch of little startups kind of iterating around this center of this again mind map here for the clean meat industry. It's companies that have deep expertise, for example, in developing cell culture media, that nutrient feed, who are now saying, look, this is a business opportunity. If we as a company don't get involved, we're missing out on a huge growth opportunity. So I think that will only accelerate the rate of progress in this field. Same with
the billions of dollars pouring in, and the different optimizations in the processes.
Yeah. Same with the bioreactors and kind of this process design in the facility. We've now got long-standing engineering firms that have done processing facilities for the petrochemicals industry for decades and decades. They're now looking at this saying, how can we bring our expertise to the table?
That's cool.
It's very cool. Yeah.
Who would have thought that would be happening? That's great. So you'll maybe get a phone call from these different industries saying that we can bring our processes in and help.
And some of them are the same companies that I was calling 2 years ago, and they were saying, oh, that's cute, like this sounds like a really sci-fi endeavor, and kind of laughed it off. And now they see how quickly things have happened in the last couple of years, and they're calling back and saying, actually, can you come workshop with us? We want to be involved. So.
Yep.
So this is one of my favorite points to make, and it's a great closing point for anyone who's listening right now, who's kind of thinking, should I get involved? Is this the right time? What's the chance that my little R&D project could actually contribute in a meaningful way. Again, I'm very like outcomes driven, right? These spheres are looking at the amount of global R&D investment that's gone into each of these different renewable energy technologies in a single year. So this happens to just be from 2011, found these numbers. So you can see billions, in some cases tens or even over 100 billion into a single type of renewable energy. And obviously we've seen tremendous growth in that sector. But it's taken many, many years of these types of R&D investments. By contrast, you know, we've seen all of the traction in the meat alternative space, both on the plant-based side of things, plus this ridiculous growth in the clean meat industry. That has been happening on a total shoestring budget. So combined across all years, we estimate there's maybe been $1 or maybe $2 billion of R&D investment into all meat alternatives, plant-based and clean meat combined. So
this is like the child is just born a couple days ago, basically.
Yeah.
And it's like, you know, there's a long way until the child's a teenager, let alone an adult. So get in early, but also like look how much progress has been made on just a little bit of resources. So I think it's, you know, like this is not going to be as tough of a nut to crack as solar energy. I really don't think. I really think that this is tractable, solvable. You know, it needs smart people and it needs resources, no doubt. Like nothing here is trivial, but I think this is, in terms of like bang for your buck, whether that's, you know, kind of in your career or literal, like a research dollar to outcome. To huge sustainable impact for the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
This is a great place to be for that.
Totally.
That's why we see so many venture capitalists and that are really excited about this space, because they care more about that sustainable impact, and this is a way that they can actually see a return as well in many ways.
There's a term that gets used a lot in this industry, especially among investors, called double bottom line. So making a lot of money, but also doing a lot of good for the world. So what are those kind of social impact metrics that come along with your investment dollar?
Interesting. I love that. Actually, I really love that a lot, because there's a lot of pressure going on by the capitalist system to be like, oh, you're social good for investing, it doesn't make any money. And then the capitalist side of things is like, well, we're going to invest into whatever, no matter what, even if it's not sustainable. So actually, I'm a huge fan of that double bottom line conversation. That's a good one.
In this case, it's like a very beautiful alignment of everyone's incentives.
Yes. What do you foresee as one of the most exciting parts of the future of meat?
I think, so I'm really excited by the fact that all of these various industries are showing up at the table, including, you know, the meat industry, like we talked about. They've been making investments, they've been developing their own product lines, et cetera. I find that really exciting, because that means that we're not going to have to fight the industry that's getting disrupted here. They actually want to be part of this disruption, which is really, really cool.
Yeah, they're not trying to like start fires in the field. They're trying to help pour resources. And that's good.
Yeah, absolutely. And then kind of within the landscape of meat alternatives, one area that I think is particularly urgent and particularly necessary, but maybe gets talked about less, is seafood. And I think that we are starting to see more traction in that area, but there's a ton left to do. So this is one of our most recent white papers that kind of maps out where we think a lot of these opportunities are, what makes the seafood sector unique from what we call terrestrial meat, and you know, how that can be leveraged by folks who want to innovate in this space.
And this is one of my favorite right here, this Ron in the top right corner, the aquaculture production over time has just been increasing to the point where it's as much now in 2030 projected to be as capture production, which is great. So we're no longer going to be pulling from the ecosystems of fish, but rather making.
But I think, so here, I think aquaculture is maybe a short-sighted solution. I think there's a lot of potential to make plant-based seafood.
Exactly.
Or, you know, cell-based seafood.
That's what Finless is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yep. The cell-based. Yeah.
So rather than even growing in the aquaculture ecosystems, it's all about.
So I like to think about it like this. So right now we are at a time in civilization where 50% of our seafood is wild caught, basically hunted, and 50% is farmed through domestic fish, right? Imagine that point in history for land-based meat, where we were still hunting 50% of our meat, and the other 50% we were farming. That was thousands of years ago, right? And this, our kind of reliance on this very intensified, industrialized animal agriculture with all of these externalized harms. Maybe we would see that with the aquaculture industry too. So we really have an opportunity here to be ahead of that curve. What if we were developing, cell-based meat substitutes or alternatives 3,000 years ago when we were at that kind of tipping point? Where would we be now? We could have kind of completely saved ourselves basically from all of the harms of that industry.
Liz, you know why I love you? That you pulled an incredible reference from history, from evolution, and how we made a transition to more animals that we were farming rather than wildly hunting. And now, same thing with oceans. We're not going to be pulling from massive ecosystems of fish. It looks ridiculous. Those videos where they're pulling a football field of fish onto a boat.
Yeah.
That looks ridiculous.
Yeah, it's absurd. It's
absurd, and it's time to transition away from that. And, wow. Wow, great. So, Liz, this has been such an amazing conversation. I'm just so blessed to have had you on the show, teaching us about the future of meat and all of it, and as much nuance as we can in the short time we have together. We typically ask a couple questions at the end of the show, but I just want to ask you one of my favorite ones, which is, what do you think is the most beautiful thing in the world?
My answer to this might sound a little lame because I'm a biologist, but I think a cell, honestly. It's like this beautiful, chaotic universe within itself that can be, persuaded to behave in a different way, but without any instruction, just kind of knows how to operate. It's this autonomous machine that I think is really beautiful.
Yes. We need to do a whole show on just the intricacies of a cell and like how gorgeous and beautiful that is. Because I totally agree with you, but I know 0.0001% about it, and I want to know more and teach more about that. Liz, wow, thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you for having me. This is super fun.
I'm glad you had a good time. I know that we are progressing towards a beautiful, sustainable future thanks to organizations like Good Food Institute, people like you. Huge thank you.
Well, we need more folks in this field, so if this at all excites you, find opportunities here.
Yeah, that little tiny $1-2 billion bubble is going to be like hundreds of billions of dollars, and exciting, and there's double bottom lines, there's all this cool stuff to explore. Stop slaughtering animals, and let's get our shit together, civilization. Much love, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in. Give us a comment below. Let us know your thoughts about the industry, about the space, about what we discuss on the show. Let's build the community together. Also, like we were just saying, go create, go build, go manifest your destiny into the world. And thank you, Liz. Thank you, Good Food Institute. Go check out the link in the bio. Thank you, Ron, our producer director. And much love, everyone. We'll talk to you soon. Peace.